Hello, YouTube. This is Mage Power, and I'm coming to you with a top 15 here. This is going to be top 15 cards Konami has ever printed that were printed for one specific archetype that ended up becoming extremely broken in at least one manner. Obviously, the Mage Power is just, for me, that's my thing. It's not part of this list, but we'll get to that. Before we get into this, I have about 5 cards that I was really trying to decide between that just didn't make it, and I just want to touch on those real quick. But we have Redux and the rest of the Dragon Rulers. This didn't make it simply because Dragon Rulers, yeah, they're an archetype, but they also, I don't know how well this would do coming back into the metagame. I think it'd be a very strong card, but I don't know if this would actually be broken. So for that purposes, it has to really be very strong to have made this list. If it wasn't at 1 or limit or banned, it probably didn't make it. Only one card made this actual list that was not on the ban list. And you could probably take a guess what that card is. Also, there was Domain of the Monarchs. This is a card that locks you out of being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh! This card is actually on the OCG ban list, but it is not here. And part of the reason for that is we had other things hit, and this is a little bit biased streamer here because I hate Monarchs. I hate this card. I hate the deck. It's in my honorable mentions here. I just couldn't put it in the top 15, though. And then we had Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. This is a card that I couldn't include it because I don't think it's broken enough, but it's gotten worse and worse over time to the point where the OCG actually changed its text and has essentially almost ruined what it once was. But for a long time, this card had been getting worse and worse and worse as far as how OP and the abuse that you could actually do with this card. So I understand, but in its current form now, it's no longer a threat. That's why it's only here in the honorables. And then we had Denglong. Part of the reason this is here is because I already have a similar card, so I will bring that up later. And I think the other card is just slightly better. And then we have Topologic Gumbar Dragon. I couldn't call this an archetype. However, it is an anime archetype, but we don't have any of those cards revealed yet, so I couldn't put this on the list yet simply because I can't quite call it an archetype. And to go right alongside that, I did the same thing with Jin, the releaser of Rituals. This card, obviously very broken, banned for a reason, but I couldn't call it an archetype, even though there's multiple cards with Jin, the something of Rituals. It's not really a playable deck. And then getting into the actual top 15. Starting off, this is actually the card, it made it because this was the card that really got me thinking about this list. We have Speedroid Terrortop at number 15. This card, obviously, it got limited because it saw play in a bunch of different decks, being able to tutor out cards like MX Saber Invoker, being able to make any rank 3 you wanted. I know there was a point people were playing it to make Totem Bird. This card was so free because you don't have to waste your normal summon on it. It gets you to your Takatamborg, and this was in just about every deck going back to Zoo format, and even before that going into other formats this was seeing play. I'm pretty sure this even, I don't remember if this got banned before Goki, but I know the Invoker itself was played in Goki, and Terrortop was a big card that summoned it. And I think being able to barely sneak onto this list, this is probably where this belongs. Next up, I was going back and forth between Master Plan and Quick Fix. Thinking about it, I think Quick Fix might have placed higher on this list, but I'm only dedicating 1 slot per archetype. So if an archetype had more than 1 broken card, only one of them is going to be represented on this list. I think Master Plan still makes it. I think the deck, before we even got links, was able to play as a reasonable deck because Master Plan existed. This was a card that lets you basically search out multiple cards and recur and do loops and loops and loops. And for that reason is why Master Plan is here and not Quick Fix. I think either one is a viable contender for this list, though. Next up, we at number 13, Guard Dragon Archetype. Obviously, Guard Dragon, the archetype here. This card being able to any 2 dragons, and you plop out any dragon from your extra deck. It's very free, very generic, being able to put out anything like a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, or I believe that's what it's called, or being able to summon out Majestic Red Dragon, I think it was, or I believe the Naturia Exterio is also a dragon, so there were a bunch of different things that you could summon out with Archetype, and it was very free, very easy to do, and this card enabled it. This card is very deserving of being on the ban list as it is right now, and this card is on my top 15 because it really is that broken. Number 14, this is the card that is essentially the Denglong on this list. This is Ib the World Chalice Justicar. Obviously, I mentioned Denglong in my honorable mentions. This card is really Denglong, but just a little bit better in my opinion. I think either one would be very deserving of this list. Obviously, Denglong almost made it, but I figured giving it to Ib did just a little bit more with its time that it had. I think Ib is the better card, and I think Ib is very deserving of this list. Then we have the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardish. This is obviously limited at 1 because it just came back. Because Konami wants to sell their Phantom Knights. Let's sell Phantom Knights. Let's sell Phantom Knights. And meanwhile, let's let all these decks that play Dark Monsters set like 2 and then be able to extend out cards out of your graveyard, getting like 2 other bodies on board, being able to set 2 negates in my back row, being able to just pop out like 3-4 cards for free because I made this one. Yeah, that's a little extreme. I contemplated this with being higher, but I don't know if it deserves it with some of these cards on this list. But I think this card, obviously, if you watched my ban list reaction when the ban list came out, I was pretty unhappy this came back, even though I knew it was a real possibility. And then we have another limited card coming in at number 10, I believe. Yep, number 10, Dragonic Diagram. I picked this over Masterpiece for one reason alone. This represents 2 archetypes, including one that is capable of making VFD, which is another very broken card. However, this card is one of very few cards in the game that allows you to search over and over and over again across multiple turns. If this card did not exist, Draco would probably not be the same deck. It probably would never have even been a meta deck, and we would have been looking at Masterpiece as like, what are you? It wouldn't really have been that great of a card, especially because this is also the card that searched Masterpiece. So this being able to search another broken card is another factor for it, plus giving destruction prevention on the Tribute Summon monsters, plus being able to destroy cards and gain effects off that destruction. There's so much going for Dragonic Diagram that it was hard for me to ignore it, although Masterpiece, I think, is the other potential for this slot. Moving forward, at number 9, we have Fishboard Blaster. This is a card, I know a lot of people wonder, well, what does this really even do in the modern game? But it's one when you start thinking about everything that it would do in the modern game, because this has been banned for so long. It's been on the ban list for years. A lot of people forget just how broken this card actually is. It might even be deserving higher on this list. It's a fish tuner So if you think about it that way, obviously Tuner is a big thing right now. First of all, it's a level 1. And it also can trigger any of the water deck monsters. So Mermail Atlantean, for example, you slap this in there, put this in the graveyard. You discard any water monster to summon this out of your graveyard, and you have a free level 1 tuner. And it triggers your effects because it's a cost. So this is a card I think would absolutely make Mermail Atlantean tier 1 and possibly tier 0 because it's really that broken. They're already hand looping as it is, actually. This card would just make them insane. And then we have at number 8, we have Triff. Oh, wait, that's Metal Foes Electromite. Sorry, that's not Triff. I know Triff wishes. Anyways, Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, this is a card, it's pretty generic for pendulums. I think this is a card that just, it's too overloaded. It's one of those cards that it's so good at trying to do so much, but it's too generic for its own good. There's a reason it took so long for it to get hit to 0, but there's also the same reason it went to 0, because it really is that broken. I think some kind of a retrain of this is probably going to be somewhere in the future, but I think all of this on one card that was so generic, really it's the genericness of this card that really made it as broken as it was, and that's really why it's on here. It enabled quite a lot, and it was involved in multiple FTKs, multiple hand loops, and a whole bunch of other things. And without this card, I don't know if those FTKs and hand loops and such would have really been as consistent. Maybe they would have still been possible. Who knows? But this card definitely was a strong enabler for a lot of powerful decks. Moving right along to number 7, we have a bit of a controversial one. We have Infernity Archfiend. This is here in the number 7 slot because there was a point in time at which if you had just Infernity Archfiend in your hand, you made your board. It didn't care if you had 4 other monsters. You set those 4 monsters in your back row and cheated, because that's what people were actually doing. I'm not saying I did that. I did not do that. But I know for a fact there were people who would draw Infernity Archfiend with another monster and some spell and traps and set everything but the Archfiend and play the Archfiend. Then someone would Mystical Space Typhoon, hit that monster set in the background. People would just scoop because, oh, well, I cheated. I don't want to get caught. And they would just pick up their cards. Next game, GG, And it was that broken because how Infernities work, you need no cards in your hand. It was hard to go between this and Launcher. I know a lot of people would also make the argument that Infernity Barrier is very broken as well, but Infernity Barrier is kind of a one and done. This, with the ability to loop it and search and do so much, this can get you to the barrier. This can get you to Launcher. This is why Archfiend made the list as high as it did. When people are cheating to try and abuse something, there's a reason why. And also, don't get me wrong here, I'm not condoning cheating. If you cheat, you should get punished accordingly, but this card caused a lot of cheating. It really did. Next up on the list, we have Sky Striker, Mobilize, Engage. For all of you who have recently played in the game, this is a card that you will easily recognize. This card basically says, add any one card from your deck to your hand, basically, and draw a card. Obviously, I am a bit exaggerating, but for those of you who faced Sky Striker, you know it's really not that big of a stretch, because most of the cards you played were Sky Striker cards. Here, let me add anything I need from my deck to my hand. Oh, and I get to draw a card too. And it's not a hard once per turn. The fact that it's not a hard once per turn is why it's so high on this list. if this card had been a hard once per turn, I don't even know if this makes the list. I think cards like Domain might have made it over it. I think Denglong might have made it over it. But with that being said, being able to activate 3 of these cards in a single turn, add any 3 cards from your deck to your hand that are Sky Striker cards, so Widow Anchor, Multi-Roll, your Field Spell, you can add Ray, you can add whatever you need, and you can then also draw a card every time you play it, assuming you have the spells engraved, which is not hard to do in a deck that's playing, what, 30 spell cards? You know, Sky Striker playing 30 spell cards is really not unreasonable for the deck. There's very justified reasons for this being number 6 on this list. And now into the top 5. I actually have 2 cards that made the top 5 that are not currently banned. The first card, Gateway of the Six. I know this is technically not a 6 Samurai, but it is made for the 6 Samurai archetype. This card being able to loop cards like Kaizen out of your graveyard for just almost free. Basically, if you could summon Kaizen and another 6 Samurai over and repeat that, you can actually loop Gateway of the Six indefinitely. There's a reason this card has not come back to 3 in the TCG. I think people realize how broken this card actually is. And I know there's a lot of people who have even shown off, even with 1 Gateway, you can still loop things and loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. And the insane boards you can build, assuming 6 Samurai doesn't get interrupted, really is kind of insanity. And the only reason why this card is at 1 is because 6 Samurai just... Oh, excuse me. I think someone's trying to get my attention. I can ignore them. But the reason why 6 Samurai isn't as great of a deck, even with a card like this, is just... It's an old deck. It's not as good. It gets stopped by, that first interruption. Once it gets stopped, it kind of dies. So, without Gateway as well, because they have to get to Gateway for them to really do a lot, it's not that great. But you see Gateway in a 6 Samurai deck with a way to get to 2 monsters, you're in business. So, obviously, I think there's almost nobody who would deny Gateway is a very broken card. I don't know if it necessarily deserves the number 5 slot. Let me know down in the comment section where you think Gateway should rank on this list, but I think it definitely should make the list. And getting into number 4, this is the only card that is not currently on the ban list. We have Crystron Needle Fiber, or as it's called here in the TCG, Crystron Halqifibrax. I don't really feel I need to explain this card, honestly. This card is very broken. It's too generic. It summons basically whatever tuner you want, and you can do whatever you want with it. And we've seen some of the boards it can make. Anybody who's played within the last... Actually, well, it's October as of recording this. So, anybody who's played within the last, 6 months has been calling for this card to get banned. This card, it's had cards banned around it, and honestly, I don't think it's right that that's been done. I understand it because I knew Konami would probably do that. Obviously, if you watched my ban list reaction, I said that was probable. But this is a card that really does need to go. This is way too broken to exist in the format, and just go out. I don't want to see you anymore. Bye. We're really getting into the cards that I have a lot of problems with here. I don't like these cards at all. So, there might be a little bias in these. Anyways, number 3, we have a card that I know DPYGO has his own nickname for it. I personally won't say that name, but Fairy Tale Snow. You know, if you know it, feel free to comment down in the comment section because it makes me laugh. But if you know that nickname, but this card, not once per turn, being able to just say hi for free and pop out and flip anything face down, and being able to get banish effects out of the graveyard, and it's actually not even once per chain, so you could just do this over and over and over. DD Crow, target Fairy Tale Snow. Okay, chain Fairy Tale Snow. Or even better, activate Fairy Tale Snow in graveyard. Chain DD Crow. Chain Fairy Tale Snow again because screw you. This is one of the only cards in the game that is not once per chain. Even looking at cards like Apollosa is once per chain. And while that's a very strong card, it means there's actually some counterplay to this. The only counterplay to this card is your opponent runs out of cards in their graveyard, which the decks that would be playing this would just fill up their grave with a ton of cards, and then gain card effects that trigger when banished potentially, and this card cannot ever come back ever. If I had to pick between grass and snow, I'd pick grass 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100, a million times out of a million. This card can never come back, and snow, no, just stay banned, stay down. I don't want to ever see you again. Number 2 on the list, we have Outer Entity Azathoth. This one was actually difficult because there is another entity monster that could have made this list, and that is Norden. Norden obviously is an elder entity. This is an outer entity, but it's essentially the same archetype. You have the other ones as well, but those haven't really ever been that relevant. And Azathoth being able to say, I'm going to summon this, and you can't play your turn because I summoned it on your turn. Yeah, it's worse than Domain. It's at the point where you're saying you can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! We're at the point where, on this list, where being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Just doesn't exist. Real quickly, though, one card I'd like to bring up because I did consider it, but it did not make the list because Azathoth did make the list, is Lunalight Tiger. Tiger did not make the list, even though it is not a hard once per turn, but it did not make the list because of Azathoth. Azathoth was really the card being summoned a lot for the Lunalight plays, and so I looked at it as Tiger was the enabler, and Azathoth was more the end result, and I thought the end result in this scenario was actually a little bit better than Tiger. Then finally, number 1. I know it's been a while, you've been watching this for a while, and I appreciate you sticking out to the end of the video. So real quick, if you enjoyed the video, before I reveal the top 1, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, hit that follow button or hit that follow on Twitch. But without any further ado, I'm going to reveal it. It is Spellbook of Judgement. This card, literally, oh, hey, I played 7 spell cards this turn. Let me draw. Actually, doesn't even draw any. Yeah. No, it's not even a draw. Let me just add 7 spellbook cards to my hand. Here, let me add a Fate. Let me add a Wisdom. Let me add a Secrets. Let me add a Magician of Prophecy. Let me add a Priestess. You can add all these cards from your deck to your hand. And then on top of that, it lets you summon a spellcaster whose level is less than the number of cards you add to your hand. So okay, it's actually less or equal to. So here, I added 7 spellbook cards to my hand. Now I'm also going to summon a High Priestess of Prophecy. And coupled with the fact that this is a quick play, so you can actually play multiple of these even during the end phase. So you can set this face down and play 4 spell cards in your opponent's end phase, activate this card, add 4 spellbook cards, summon a level 4 or lower, so you could summon out your blue boy and get blue boy. And this card was engage before engage, and this card was absolutely just nuts. This card, someone on Konami was on crack when they made this card. I don't know. This card should never have existed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever. I don't care what other cards existed. This card, in my opinion, is the most broken card to ever be included in a specific archetype. Anyways, I appreciate you watching the video. Thank you. Once again, this has been United We Stand. In Mage Power, we trust.